In this video, I'm going to be removing and replacing the front tire on a 2017 Tiger Explorer. That's a Triumph Tiger Explorer. And before I actually loosen up anything to remove the front tire or the spindle shaft, I need to note the position of the spacers. On this particular Explorer, what we have here is we have spacers that are unique to their position. So what I'm going to need to do here is note that on the right hand side, this spacer that will fall out once I remove the tire has two machined rings on it. So this is on the right hand side as I'm facing the front. Two machined rings that go around the spacer. That's on the right hand side. If I look over on the left hand side, if my pup will let me in there to look, what we're also going to note is that we have something similar over here, but on the left hand side, a little more difficult to see because of the help I'm receiving here, is going to be one machined ring on that particular spacer. So we just need to note the orientation so that when we go to reposition it on a reassembly, we know where they go. Just to be a little bit clearer, a little better picture, here is where the one ring will be on the bushing for the left-hand side. The other thing that I've done in preparation on this particular bike setup, I do have a center stand. So in some regard, instead of propping them up with jacks or anything like that, what I've opted to do is with the center stand, all your weight goes to the front tire. It lifts the back tire off. What I'm going to do instead is use something that I might carry in my bag. And on my bag, I would have a ratchet strap. And using the ratchet strap, I'm going to hook up to one of the loops on the back of the bike, one of the holes. And in this case, I don't have a loaded bike on a trip, so I'm just grabbed 60 pounds of dumbbell weights, cinched to it, and then ratcheted down until the back wheel is firmly on the ground. And what that's done is that's made the front tire clear of the ground so that it will aid in removal. If you look, you can see that clearly got a space with the front tire off the ground. The next step that I'm going to do is, because the rim of the tire is too thick to get out between the two brake calipers, one on each side for the front wheel disc brake, one on each side, I'm going to need to remove one. To do that, I'm going to come in here and I'm actually going to remove each of these bolts. And then I've got a bungee cord that I have set up. And with this bungee cord, I'm going to try to use that just to relieve pressure off the brakes so that it's not hanging purely on the brake lines after I remove it. Probably isn't necessary, might be overkill, but since I have it, I'm going to use it. So I'm going to try to break the brake calipers loose here. Okay, that one's loose. Probably should have done this while the tire was still on the ground. Here we go. On this particular bike, this is looks like an 8mm Allen or an H8. I Here we have a nice thunderstorm going on outside, so I expect at some point I'll probably lose power. All right. Set these bolts aside. I do have a plastic case set up to put loose bolts in, but I don't have it right here at hand. Slide the brake caliper off on this side. And again, I don't want all that pressure on the brake line. Take this bungee, take some of the pressure off, and that's the removal of the brake caliper. You could have taken either one of these off. What I did is I opted to do this side because on the opposite side I have ABS sensor. That particular line and the sensor are integral with the bundle of the lines coming down. I just didn't want to hassle with it, so I opted to do this side, a little bit cleaner, and I have a little bit more light on this side. Now what I've done is I'm preparing to remove the spindle shaft, and before I do that, I'm actually going to loosen the spindle screws that are cinch screws that are holding it in the front. I've also released the pressure off of the weights that I have in the back so that the front tire is fully on the ground. This so I don't get so much play when I go to actually loosen the shaft on the front. Be able to push down into the tire and not have the bike moving around on me. And then once I get that loosened up, then I'll go to the back, cinch it back up, and make sure that the front wheel is suspended off the ground. So the next thing I'm going to do here is actually loosen up the spindle pinch bolts, the fork bolts here, so that I can actually loosen the spindle, the shaft. Okay, loosening the pinch bolts here. Just get them loose, don't actually have to remove them. That was holding pressure on the shaft to keep the shaft in place. Remember that the spacer is longer on the right hand side, and it's a side that has 2 machined rings on it. So I need to remember that, need to write it down, need to keep track of it somehow. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the spindle shaft, and I'm just using a breaker bar on this. I have a torque wrench available that I will be using to reassemble. So right now I've got it loosened up. I'm not going to go any further until I lift the front wheel back up off the ground. Okay, so I have re-elevated the tire, suspended back off the ground. I've also grabbed my plastic tub with some divider compartments in it that I'm going to be putting my bolts and shaft and anything like that I just want to keep track of so it's not rolling around in my garage. Finish removing the shaft here. When the spacers come out, I'll also have a place to put those. Now, some of you will be looking at this video going, man, that guy does not know how to handle a breaker bar or a ratchet set. Well, dude, I chase electrons for a living. Sit at a computer most of the day writing training material for technicians. unrelated to motorcycles or automobiles, strictly industrial. So this is just me, you know, hacking away, trying to do the best I can. So it appears to be loose, and I'm going to pull this out slowly. I'm feeling it drop. It is dropping. So I'm going to get a foot underneath the tire just so I can relieve some pressure off the shaft as I'm pulling the shaft out. Just so I got a little playroom on it. Yeah, there we go. Okay, there's a coating of grease on this, so the last thing I want to do is lay this directly on the ground. So I'm going to let the tire lean against the forks for a minute. And lay the spindle on top of the plastic container. Just to keep it off the ground, keep all the grit and grime out of it. I'm also taking the spacer off. And note the orientation of the spacer. Like I said, there's machined lines in it. Just wiping off some of the extra dirt and road grime. What I'm noting on this particular spacer is that it has one line, then it has the two machined lines, and then there's nothing on the part that was nearest the fork. So I'm going to remember that orientation right there so that I get it in the exact orientation when I go to reassemble this. So this is again the one on the spacer on the right hand side. Stick that in my little plastic container. And need to get the tire past the brake caliper. And not wanting to cooperate. There we go. So I got that unit out. Also, what's important is if you've never done this before, never watched any YouTube videos, what we have is we have two brake discs, the one on the right hand side and the left hand side. The one on the left hand side on my particular bike has an extra ring. Now what you want to note on this extra ring right here is that this is actually what the ABS sensor is measuring. So it has lots of slots in it. So it can tell if there's wheel movement or no wheel movement. Part of what the ABS does, you know, if it's expecting to have wheel movement and it doesn't see pulses coming back off the sensor from this ring, then it knows your wheel's sliding and it does, you know, it alters the brake. So basically you just have some sort of sensor, like a capacitor of some sort, that's just looking for the slots in this ring. You get so many pulses per revolution, and maybe based on speed or something like that. So that is on my left hand side. Make sure that it goes back on that way. The other thing on a tire has a rotation. So when we go to reassemble, we're gonna have to find out the rotation arrow on our tire, and we're gonna have to make sure that when we reinstall that we actually reinstall it with the rim in the proper direction and the tire in the proper direction, so that when it's rotating, it's actually going to be going in the proper orientation down the road. Once you have your tire balanced and the beads set, the next step is to start the assembly process. So I'm going to get past the caliper, the one caliper that's on there. It was a little bit tight coming off. Make sure you have your tire orientation proper. And I'm also being very careful because in addition to trying to line it up into the brake pads, I do not want to damage the ABS sensor. Remember the orientation of your spacers. Okay, I did have to remove the other brake caliper because I did not have enough hands to be able to get the disc into the caliper and keep the spacers into place as I was putting the shaft in. So I finally had to give in and go ahead and take the other caliper off. Got that off. Once I did, it was easier to align the tire. I did that by loosening up the strap in the back of the bike that I was using to hold the back tire down so that I had a little more wiggle room. Now I've got the rod threaded in and I'm going to torque it, and I have my torque wrench set to my torque specification, in this case 65 Newton meters for the shaft. So I have my torque in. So the next thing I'm going to need to do is tighten up the spindles, spindle pinch bolts here. Snug them down first. Put the caliper back in place. Get these finger tight first. I'm going to reroute my ABS line back to where it was previously, back underneath the little holder there, so I don't forget. So I have that side finger tight. brake pads are sliding together. There we go. Again, I'm not very mechanically inclined. So tips and tricks that might be obvious to others are not so obvious to me. Snug the brake caliper back up. All right, I have those snugged up.